When Jakob Brennan opened his cabin door to a desperate woman fleeing through the storm, he had no idea she carried secrets that would force him to confront the false accusations that had driven him into exile 3 years ago. Two outcasts find themselves bound together by shared truths and the courage to trust again. But when bounty hunters arrive seeking Eleanor for murder, will Jakob's kindness prove to be salvation or his final undoing? The mountain lion's scream cut through the darkness like a blade, and Jakob Brennan's hand moved to his rifle before his eyes fully opened. But the cabin stayed quiet after that wild cry faded into the Montana night, leaving only the whisper of wind through pine needles and the familiar creak of old wood settling. He sat up in his narrow bed, listening. 3 years of living alone in the wilderness had taught him to read every sound the forest made. The difference between a branch falling and a footstep, between an animal hunting and a human hiding, between safety and danger. Tonight felt different. Jakob swung his legs over the side of the bed and pulled on his boots. The cabin's single room felt smaller in the darkness, filled with shadows that seemed to move when he wasn't looking directly at them. On the table, his latest carving project waited, a wooden horse with a flowing mane that would never feel a child's hands. He'd been dreaming about Denver again, about the courtroom, about little Mary's tears and the way the judge's gavel had sounded like a coffin lid closing, about the crowd outside, calling for his blood. The wind picked up, rattling the windows. Jakob moved to the fireplace and stirred the coals back to life. Orange light danced across the walls, revealing shelves lined with carved animals, bears, deer, rabbits, all waiting for children who would never come. H-piece perfect, H-piece useless. Thunder rumbled in the distance. A storm was coming. He'd built this cabin with his own hands, choosing a spot far from any trail, hidden in a valley where the mountains stood like guards. The nearest town was Copper Falls, 20 miles through rough country, perfect for a man who needed to disappear. But disappearing came with a price. The silence pressed against his ears until he sometimes caught himself talking to the wooden animals, just to hear a human voice, even if it was his own. Lightning flickered beyond the windows, followed by another roll of thunder. Closer now. Jakob pulled on his jacket and stepped onto the small porch to watch the storm approach. The forest stretched out before him, dark and endless. Somewhere in that wilderness, wolves howled at the moon. Somewhere else, that mountain lion prowled through the underbrush, hunting. Everything in the wild had its place, its purpose. Everything except him. The first drops of rain hit the roof like small stones. Jakob started to turn back inside when he heard a sound that didn't belong to the storm or the forest. A sound that made his blood freeze. Footsteps. Human footsteps. Stumbling through the trees. He pressed himself against the cabin wall, heart hammering. Nobody came here. Nobody even knew this place existed. He'd made sure of that. But the footsteps kept coming, uneven and desperate. Getting closer. Jakob's hand found his rifle, but he didn't raise it. Not yet. Through the rain, he caught glimpses of movement between the trees. A figure, walking like someone who'd been traveling for days without rest. The lightning flashed again, and in that brief moment of brightness, Jakob saw her clearly. A woman, young, her dress torn and muddy. She moved like each step cost her everything she had left. She was heading straight for his cabin. Every instinct screamed at him to blow out the lamps, to hide, to wait until she passed by. But something about the way she walked, broken but determined, kept him frozen in place. The woman reached the edge of a small clearing and stopped. Rain poured down her face as she stared at the cabin, at the warm light glowing in the windows, at the promise of shelter. She looked around the clearing, searching for signs of danger. Smart. A woman alone in the wilderness had to be careful, had to assume every stranger might be a threat. But desperation won over caution. She stumbled forward, crossed the cleared ground, and climbed the 3 wooden steps to his porch. Jakob held his breath. He could hear her breathing, ragged and exhausted, could smell the rain on her clothes and something else, fear. She raised her hand to knock, then hesitated. Through the window, he saw her face clearly for the first time. Young, maybe 20, pretty, even with mud streaking her cheeks and rain plastering her hair to her skull. But it was her eyes that caught him. They held a wildness. He recognized the look of someone who'd lost everything and was still running from the wreckage. The woman knocked. 3 sharp raps that echoed through the cabin like gunshots. Jakob's rifle trembled in his hands. He couldn't answer, couldn't let her in, couldn't risk it. But she knocked again, harder this time. And then he heard her voice, barely a whisper through the storm. "Please, I know someone's in there. I can see the light." The words hit him like a physical blow. How long had it been since someone had asked him for help? Since someone had needed him? "Please," she said again, and this time her voice broke. "I won't hurt you. I just need somewhere to wait out the storm." Jakob set down his rifle and moved to the window. The woman stood with her back to him, shoulders shaking. Not from cold, he realized. From exhaustion. From whatever had driven her into the wilderness alone. She turned around, and their eyes met through the glass. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then she pressed her palm against the window, and he saw the desperation there. The same desperation he'd carried for 3 years. "I have nowhere else to go," she said. The words broke something inside him. Before he could stop himself, Jakob's hand was on the door handle. Before he could think about the consequences, he was turning the lock. The door opened, and the woman stumbled backward, startled. Rain whipped across the porch, soaking them both. "Come in," Jakob heard himself say. The words came out hoarse, like he'd forgotten how to use his voice for anything but talking to carved animals. The woman stared at him, taking in his weathered face, his gray-streaked hair, the way his hands shook slightly as he held the door open. She was deciding whether to trust him, whether the warmth of his cabin was worth the risk of stepping inside with a stranger. "Come in," he said again, then added the words that had become his armor, his warning, his last attempt to protect them both. "If kindness doesn't scare you." The woman's laugh was sharp and bitter, cutting through the rain like broken glass. "Mister," she said, water dripping from her hair, "after what I've been through, kindness is the least scary thing I can imagine." She stepped across the threshold, and Jakob felt the world shift around him. The cabin that had been his fortress, his hiding place, suddenly felt different. Smaller, more real. "Thank you," she whispered, and those 2 words carried more weight than any he'd heard in years. Jakob closed the door behind her and turned to face his unexpected guest. She stood in the middle of his small room, dripping rain onto the wooden floor, looking around with eyes that missed nothing, taking in the carved animals on the shelves, the neat stack of books, the single bed, the small table, the careful order of a life lived in complete isolation. "I'm Eleanor," she said, wrapping her arms around herself. "Eleanor Hartwell." "Jakob," he replied, then immediately wished he hadn't. Names created connection, and connection was dangerous, but it was too late now. Eleanor's teeth chattered as she stood there, and Jacob realized he was staring. He moved quickly to the chest in the corner and pulled out a thick wool blanket, one of the few luxuries he'd allowed himself. "Here," he said, holding it out to her. "You need to get warm." She reached for the blanket, and their fingers brushed for just a moment. Her skin was ice cold, but something else passed between them in that touch. Recognition, maybe, or understanding, like they were both refugees from the same war. Eleanor wrapped the blanket around her shoulders and moved closer to the fireplace. The flames cast dancing shadows across her face, and Jakob could see her more clearly now. She was beautiful, but it was a damaged beauty. There were dark circles under her eyes, and a cut on her lip that looked a few days old. "You're hurt," he said, noticing the way she held her left side. "It's nothing," she said quickly, too quickly. Nothing doesn't make someone walk through a storm alone at night. Eleanor's eyes met his, and he saw a flash of something surprise. Maybe that he'd noticed, that he cared enough to notice. "I was traveling," she said carefully. "With a group. We were heading to Helena." "Where?" She looked away. "There was trouble. I got separated from the others." Jakob knew she wasn't telling him everything. The careful way she chose her words, the way she avoided his eyes, she'd done the same thing when people asked about his past. Some truths were too dangerous to share with strangers. "How long have you been walking?" he asked instead. 3 days, maybe 4. Time gets mixed up when you're—" She gestured vaguely at herself, at the torn dress and muddy shoes. "When you're like this. 3 days. In the wilderness. Alone." Jakob felt something twist in his chest. He knew what it was like to be lost, to have nowhere to go. But he'd chosen his isolation. Eleanor looked like someone who'd had it forced on her. "Are you hungry?" he asked. She nodded, and he saw her throat move as she swallowed. Probably hadn't eaten in days. Jakob moved to the small stove and started pulling out supplies. Salt pork, beans, a bit of bread that wasn't too stale. Simple food, but hot and filling. As he worked, he was aware of Eleanor watching him, studying his movements. "You live here alone?" she asked. "Yes." "By choice?" The question hung in the air between them. Jakob kept his back to her as he stirred the beans. "Sometimes we choose our circumstances. Sometimes they choose us. Which was it for you?" He turned to look at her then. Eleanor sat curled in the chair by the fire, the blanket pulled tight around her shoulders. Her green eyes were sharp, intelligent, not the eyes of someone who would accept easy answers. "Both," he said finally. She nodded like she understood. "Me too." They fell into silence as he finished preparing the meal. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the rain drumming against the roof. But it wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the quiet of two people who had learned that sometimes words weren't necessary. When the food was ready, Jakob set a plate in front of Eleanor and watched her eat. She tried to pace herself, but he could see she was starving. The beans disappeared quickly, followed by the bread and most of the salt pork. "Better?" he asked when she'd finished. "Much. Thank you." She set down her fork and looked at him directly. "Why did you help me?" The question caught him off guard. You needed help. Plenty of people need help. That doesn't mean everyone gets it. Jakob stared into the fire, thinking, why had he opened the door? Why had he let her in when everything in his life had taught him to stay hidden, to avoid contact with anyone who might recognize him? "Maybe," he said slowly, "because I know what it's like to be alone in a storm." Eleanor studied his face in the firelight. "You're afraid of me," she said suddenly. "I'm afraid for you," he corrected. "There's a difference." "What's the difference?" Jakob was quiet for a long moment. "I'm afraid of what people might think, what they might assume, what they might do." "About what?" He met her eyes, and for a moment, he considered telling her everything. About Denver, about the accusation, about the way an entire town had turned against him based on lies. But the risk was too great. Even if she believed him, even if she didn't judge him, the truth would change everything between them. "About a man living alone in the wilderness helping a young woman," he said instead. "People assume the worst about situations like this." Eleanor's expression softened. "Are you dangerous?" "No." "Then I'm not afraid." The simple statement hit him like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had said they weren't afraid of him? When was the last time someone had looked at him without suspicion, without judgment? "You should be," he said quietly. "Not of me, but of what people will think if they find you here. Let me worry about that." But Jakob could see the exhaustion in her eyes, the way she swayed slightly even sitting down. Whatever had driven her into the wilderness was still chasing her, and she was running on empty. "You need rest," he said. "You can take the bed. I'll sleep by the fire." "I can't take your bed." "You can, and you will." His voice was firm. "You're dead on your feet." Eleanor started to protest, but a yawn overtook her. "Just for a few hours. Then I'll be on my way." "Where will you go?" "I don't know yet." The honesty in her voice broke his heart. Here was someone as lost as he was, as cut off from the world. But where his isolation was self-imposed, hers seemed forced on her by circumstances beyond her control. "We'll figure it out in the morning," he said. "For now, just rest." Eleanor nodded and stood slowly, wincing as she did. That injury to her side was worse than she was letting on. But she moved to the bed and sat down on the edge, looking suddenly young and vulnerable. "Jakob?" she said softly. "Yes?" "Thank you. For the kindness. For not being afraid to show it." As she settled onto the bed and pulled the quilt up to her chin, Jakob arranged himself by the fire with an extra blanket. But sleep didn't come easily. He lay awake listening to Eleanor's breathing, to the rain on the roof, to the whisper of wind through the trees. For the first time in 3 years, he wasn't alone. And despite all the dangers that came with that, despite all the ways this could go wrong, he discovered something that surprised him. He wasn't afraid anymore. The scream that woke Jakob wasn't human. It was the sound of pure terror, ripped from Eleanor's throat as she thrashed against invisible attackers in her sleep. Her fists struck the air, fighting demons only she could see. and her voice broke as she cried out names he didn't recognize. "No! Don't touch me, Charles, please!" Jakob was on his feet before he fully understood what was happening. Eleanor writhed on the bed, tangled in the quilt, her face twisted with fear even in unconsciousness. Sweat beaded on her forehead despite the cool morning air. "Eleanor," he said softly, keeping his distance. He'd learned long ago that waking someone from a nightmare too quickly could be dangerous. "Eleanor, you're safe." But she couldn't hear him. In her dream, she was somewhere else entirely, somewhere terrible. Her breathing came in sharp gasps, and she pressed herself against the wall as if trying to escape something closing in on her. "Please," she whispered, her voice small and broken. "I won't tell anyone. I promise I won't tell." The words hit Jakob like a punch to the gut. He'd heard those same words before, from another voice, in another time. Little Mary, 8 years old, begging her uncle to stop hurting her, promising to keep his secrets if he'd just leave her alone. "Eleanor." This time his voice was firmer. "Wake up. You're not there anymore." Her eyes flew open, wild and unfocused. For a moment, she didn't seem to recognize where she was. Then her gaze found Jakob, and the relief that flooded her face was almost too much to bear. "I was dreaming," she said, her voice shaky. "I know." She sat up slowly, pushing damp hair away from her face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to wake you. You don't need to apologize for nightmares." Eleanor wrapped the quilt around herself and looked toward the window. Morning light filtered through the glass, painting everything in soft gold. "What time is it?" "Still early. Sun's been up about an hour." She nodded and stood carefully, favoring her left side. The movement pulled at her torn dress, and Jakob caught a glimpse of dark bruising along her ribs, not from a fall or an accident, from someone's hands. "Eleanor," he said gently. "Who's Charles?" The question made her freeze. Color drained from her face, and for a moment, Jakob thought she might faint. She gripped the back of the chair for support. "I don't know what you mean. You were calling his name in your sleep, asking him to stop." Eleanor's jaw tightened. It was just a dream. But Jakob knew better. He'd spent 3 years learning to read the signs of someone carrying secrets, someone running from a past they couldn't escape. He recognized the careful way she held herself, the way she jumped at unexpected sounds, the way she watched the door as if expecting someone to burst through it. "Dreams don't leave bruises," he said quietly. Eleanor's hand moved instinctively to her side, then stopped. "You don't know anything about it." "I know enough." Jakob moved to the stove and started preparing breakfast, giving her space to breathe. "I know you're hurt. I know you're scared. And I know you're running from something more than just a separated wagon train. It's not your business. Maybe not. But you're in my home, and that makes it my business whether you're safe here." Eleanor was quiet. For a long moment, Jakob could feel her watching him as he cracked eggs into the pan, her mind working through what to tell him and what to keep hidden. "My husband," she said finally. "Charles was my husband." The past tense wasn't lost on Jakob. "Was? He's dead." Jakob turned to look at her. Eleanor stood by the window, staring out at the forest. Her voice was flat, emotionless, but her hands trembled slightly. "How?" he asked. "Does it matter?" "It might." Eleanor closed her eyes. "Someone killed him. Shot him in his study 3 nights ago. When I found him, there was blood everywhere. The safe was open, emptied out, and then..." She trailed off. "Then what?" "Then people started saying I did it." The words hung in the air between them. Jakob set down his spatula and turned to face her fully. "Did you?" Eleanor's eyes snapped open. "No, but I can't prove it. And there are people who want me to hang for it, whether I did it or not." "Why would they think you killed him?" A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "Because wives kill husbands all the time. Because we fought. Because I had marks on me, and people assumed they were from him, fighting back instead of." She gestured vaguely at her bruised ribs. "Instead of what?" "Instead of from him beating me every time he'd had too much to drink." The truth hit Jakob like a physical blow. He'd suspected, but hearing it confirmed made his chest tighten with rage. "He hurt you. For 2 years. Ever since we got married." Eleanor's voice was steady now, matter of fact. "At first, it was just when he was drunk. Then, it was when he was angry. Then, it was just because he could. Why didn't you leave?" "Where would I go? I had no money, no family. And Charles made sure everyone in town knew I was difficult, prone to accidents, clumsy. She touched the cut on her lip. This is from 2 weeks ago. I dropped a plate at dinner, and he said I did it on purpose to embarrass him. Jakob felt something dark and violent stir in his chest. The same feeling he'd had when he'd first heard what Mary's uncle had done to her. The need to protect, to fight back, to make someone pay. So when he died, Eleanor continued, when someone finally stopped him, I should have been grateful. But instead, I became the prime suspect. Who do you think really killed him? I don't know. Charles had enemies, business partners who felt cheated, men who owed him money, men he owed money to. She shrugged. Could have been anyone. But you ran anyway. I ran because I knew no one would believe me. A woman's word against a dead man's reputation? They'd already decided I was guilty. Jakob understood that feeling all too well. The weight of accusation, the way it poisoned everything around you, the way people looked at you differently once the whispers started. What will you do now? He asked. I don't know. I can't go back to town. Can't go to the authorities. Can't even use my real name without someone recognizing it. She laughed bitterly. I guess I'll just keep running until I find somewhere they've never heard of Charles Hartwell or his murderous wife. You could stay here. The words came out before Jakob could stop them. Eleanor stared at him in surprise. You don't know me, she said. You don't know what I might have done. I know enough. You know nothing. For all you know, I really did kill him. For all you know, I'm dangerous. Jakob met her eyes steadily. Are you? I don't know anymore. The honesty in her voice broke something open in Jakob's chest. Here was someone as lost as he was, as marked by circumstances beyond their control, someone who understood what it meant to be judged for things they didn't do. I had a job once, he said quietly. In Denver. I was a carpenter, had my own shop, steady customers. I was good at what I did. Eleanor watched him, sensing that he was about to share something important. There was a little girl who used to come by. Mary. She liked to watch me work. Sweet kid, maybe 8 years old. Her family lived a few blocks away. Jakob's hands clenched at his sides. One day she came in crying, said her uncle had been touching her, hurting her. She was scared to tell anyone, but she trusted me. What did you do? I reported it. Went straight to the sheriff, told him what Mary had told me. I thought I was doing the right thing. But the uncle was the sheriff's brother, well-connected, respected in the community, and I was just a carpenter. Unmarried, kept to myself. When they needed someone to blame, I was an easy target. Eleanor's expression softened. They accused you of touching her, of making up the story about her uncle to cover my own crimes. By the time the truth came out, it was too late. The damage was done. I lost my business, my reputation, everything. People crossed the street to avoid me. Parents pulled their children away when they saw me coming. So you came here. I came here because I had nowhere else to go. Because sometimes the only way to survive is to disappear. They stood in silence for a moment. Two people who understood the weight of false accusations, the way suspicion could destroy a life, even without proof. I'm sorry, Eleanor said finally. For what? For what they did to you. For what they took from you. Jakob nodded. I'm sorry too. For what your husband did. For what people are saying about you now. We make quite a pair, don't we? Eleanor's smile was sad but genuine. The accused child molester and the accused murderer. Maybe that's exactly what we need to be. The rider appeared at the edge of the clearing just as Jakob was splitting wood behind the cabin, his axe frozen mid-swing when he spotted the figure watching from the tree line. The man sat perfectly still on his horse, studying the cabin with the patience of someone who hunted people for a living. Eleanor, Jakob called softly, not taking his eyes off the stranger. We have company. She appeared in the doorway, a dish towel still in her hands from washing their breakfast plates. The domestic scene they'd created over the past 2 days, the comfortable routine of sharing meals and quiet conversations shattered the moment she saw the rider. Oh, God, she whispered, her face going white. It's Deputy Marshal Hawkins. Jakob set down his axe carefully, his mind racing. You know him? He's the one who came to question me about Charles. He's the one who decided I was guilty. Eleanor's voice was tight with fear. If he's here, It means someone told him where to find me. The marshal nudged his horse forward, entering the clearing with the confidence of a man who wore a badge and knew how to use it. He was younger than Jakob had expected, maybe 35, with hard eyes and a mustache that didn't quite hide the cruel set of his mouth. "Morning, folks," Hawkins called out, his voice carrying easily across the small space. "Beautiful day, isn't it?" Jakob stepped protectively in front of Eleanor, though he kept his hands visible and non-threatening. "Can we help you with something, Marshal?" "Deputy Marshal," Hawkins corrected. "And yes, I believe you can. I'm looking for a woman, Eleanor Hartwell. Heard she might be in this area. Haven't seen anyone by that name," Jakob said evenly. Hawkins smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "Funny thing about these mountains, people tend to help each other out, share information. And the information I've been getting says a woman matching Mrs. Hartwell's description was seen heading this way 3 days ago." Behind Jakob, Eleanor remained silent, but he could feel her trembling. Not from fear, he realized, but from rage. The same kind of cold anger he'd felt when people in Denver had whispered about him behind his back. "Like I said," Jakob repeated, "haven't seen anyone. Mind if I take a look around? Just to be sure?" "Actually, I do mind. This is my property." Hawkins' expression hardened. "You got papers proving that?" "I've got 3 years of living here peacefully. That's proof enough." The marshal dismounted and tied his horse to a nearby tree. "See, the thing is, I've got a warrant for Eleanor Hartwell's arrest. Murder in the first degree. That gives me certain rights. Only if you can prove she's here, which I can't do without looking around." Hawkins stepped closer, his hand resting casually on his gun. "So, I'm going to ask you one more time, nice and polite. Have you seen Eleanor Hartwell?" Jakob felt Eleanor move behind him, and before he could stop her, she stepped out from behind his protective stance. "I'm Eleanor Hartwell," she said, her voice steady despite the fear in her eyes. "Eleanor, no," Jakob said. But she ignored him. "I'm here, Deputy Marshal. What do you want?" Hawkins' smile widened. Well, well, that makes things easier, doesn't it?" He pulled out a pair of iron shackles. "Eleanor Hartwell, you're under arrest for the murder of your husband, Charles Hartwell. I didn't kill him. That's for a jury to decide, ma'am. Now, are you going to come along peacefully, or do we need to do this the hard way?" Eleanor lifted her chin. "I'm not going anywhere with you." "I'm afraid that's not your choice." "It is if she's under my protection," Jakob said, stepping forward. Hawkins laughed. "Your protection? And who exactly are you, mister?" "Jakob Brennan." The name hit the marshal like a physical blow. His eyes widened, and his hand moved instinctively toward his gun. "Jakob Brennan, the child molester from Denver. I was never convicted of anything." "No, but you ran away like a guilty man, and now here you are, harboring a fugitive, a female fugitive." Hawkins shook his head. "This is rich. This is really rich. I'm not harboring anyone. Mrs. Hartwell is free to leave any time she wants." "But she doesn't want to leave, does she? She's been playing house with you for 3 days. Makes a man wonder what kind of arrangement you two have worked out." The implication in his words made Jakob's blood boil. "Watch your mouth, Marshal." "Or what? You'll do to me what you did to that little girl in Denver?" "I never touched that child." "Right. Just like Mrs. Hartwell here never killed her husband. You two are perfect for each other." Eleanor stepped forward, her eyes blazing. "You don't know anything about what happened to Charles." "I know enough. I know he was shot in his study. I know the safe was cleaned out. I know you were the only one with access to both the gun and the combination." Hawkins counted the points on his fingers. "And I know you disappeared right after it happened. I left because I knew people like you would blame me no matter what the truth was." "The truth?" Hawkins laughed. "The truth is that you got tired of being married to a man who wouldn't let you spend his money however you wanted. So you killed him and took what you thought was yours. Charles never gave me a penny that wasn't necessary for household expenses, so you decided to take it all at once." "I didn't take anything. I didn't even know the safe was open until I found his body." "Then explain why you ran." Eleanor's hands clenched into fists. "Because I knew you'd never believe me. Because I knew you'd rather hang a woman than admit you might be wrong." "I'm not wrong," Hawkins said coldly. "And you're coming with me." He stepped toward Eleanor, shackles ready. But Jakob moved between them. "She's not going anywhere," he said quietly. "You really want to do this, Brennan?" You really want to add interfering with a federal marshal to your list of crimes? I'm not interfering with anything. I'm protecting an innocent woman. Innocent? Hawkins snorted. Just like you were innocent in Denver? The words hit their mark. Jakob felt the familiar weight of shame and anger settling on his shoulders. But this time, something was different. This time, he wasn't alone. He was innocent, Eleanor said firmly. Just like I'm innocent now. You don't know anything about what happened in Denver, Hawkins said dismissively. I know enough. I know he's a good man who was destroyed by lies and gossip. I know he's been living in exile for 3 years because people like you decided he was guilty without proof. And I know you're a murderer who's been hiding out with a child molester. Birds of a feather, as they say. The insult was too much. Jakob's control snapped, and he lunged forward, his fist connecting with Hawkins' jaw before the marshal could react. The man stumbled backward, cursing, his hand going to his gun. Big mistake, Brennan, Hawkins snarled, drawing his weapon. Real big mistake. But Eleanor was faster. She grabbed the water pitcher from the porch and hurled it at the marshal's head. The ceramic shattered against his skull, and Hawkins went down hard, his gun skittering across the ground. Jakob dove for the weapon, snatching it up before Hawkins could recover. The marshal groaned and rolled over, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. You're both dead, he gasped. You hear me? Dead. No, Eleanor said, her voice deadly calm. We're finally alive. She looked at Jakob, and in her eyes, he saw the same determination he felt burning in his own chest. They'd both spent too long running from lies, too long letting other people define who they were. What do we do now? Jakob asked. Eleanor picked up the marshal's fallen shackles and smiled grimly. Now we get some answers. The cold metal of the shackles clicked shut around Deputy Marshal Hawkins' wrists, and for the first time in 3 years, Jakob Brennan felt like he was the one in control. The marshal sat tied to a wooden chair in the center of the cabin, blood still trickling from the cut on his forehead, his eyes burning with fury and something else fear. This is kidnapping, Hawkins snarled, testing the ropes that bound him to the chair. You're both going to hang for this. Eleanor paced in front of him like a caged wolf, her earlier terror replaced by something far more dangerous. We're already supposed to hang, remember? According to you, we're both murderers. I never said Brennan was a murderer. No, just something worse. Eleanor's voice dripped with contempt. At least murderers kill adults who can fight back. Jakob stood by the window, keeping watch for other riders, while part of his mind struggled to process what they'd just done. They'd assaulted a federal marshal, taken him prisoner. There was no going back from this. You're making this worse for yourselves, Hawkins said, but his voice lacked its earlier confidence. Let me go now, and maybe I can put in a good word. Shut up, Eleanor snapped. You've said enough lies for one day. She stopped pacing and knelt down in front of the marshal's chair, her face inches from his. I want to know who told you I was here. I'm not telling you anything. Then you're going to sit there until you change your mind. Hawkins tried to lean away from her, but the ropes held him fast. You can't keep me here forever. Watch us. Jakob turned away from the window. Eleanor, we need to think about this. People will come looking for him. Let them come. I'm tired of running. She stood up and faced Jakob, her green eyes blazing. I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of letting people like him destroy innocent lives. But if we what? If we let him go, he'll arrest me and probably you too. If we run, we'll spend the rest of our lives looking over our shoulders. At least this way, we might get some answers. Jakob understood her logic, but the weight of what they'd done pressed down on him. They'd crossed the line. There was no pretending to be innocent victims anymore. What do you want to know? He asked. Eleanor turned back to Hawkins. I want to know who really killed my husband, and I want to know who's been pulling your strings. I don't know what you're talking about. Of course you do. You showed up here too fast, Marshal. 3 days after I disappeared, you're knocking on Jakob's door? That's not investigation. That's someone telling you exactly where to look. Hawkins' jaw tightened, but he didn't respond. Someone's been feeding you information, Eleanor continued. Someone who wanted me found. Someone who wanted me arrested before I could ask too many questions about Charles's death. You're crazy. Am I? Then explain how you knew I was here. Explain how you found a cabin that's 20 miles from the nearest town, hidden in a valley that's not on any map. Jakob's mind raced. Eleanor was right. He'd chosen this location specifically because it was impossible to find unless you knew exactly where to look. For Hawkins to have located them so quickly. Someone told you, Jakob said slowly. Someone who's been watching us. That's impossible. Nobody knows about this place. Somebody does. Eleanor's voice was deadly quiet. Somebody who knew I would come here. Somebody who knew about you, Jakob. About your past. About what you've been accused of. The pieces clicked together in Jakob's mind like a puzzle solving itself. This wasn't about finding you by accident. This was about driving you to me. What are you talking about? Think about it. You're running from a murder charge. You're desperate, alone, scared. You stumble onto the one person in the territory who might understand what it's like to be falsely accused. What are the odds? Eleanor's eyes widened. You think someone planned this? I think someone knew exactly what would happen when a frightened woman showed up at my door. I think someone counted on me helping you. But why? Before Jacob could answer, Hawkins started laughing. It was a cold, bitter sound that made the hair on the back of Jacob's neck stand up. You're smarter than I gave you credit for, Brennan, the marshal said. It means you're right about one thing. This whole situation was planned. But you're wrong about who's pulling the strings. Eleanor grabbed the front of Hawkins' shirt. Who? Who's behind this? Someone who's been very interested in both of you for a very long time. Someone who needed you out of the way, Mrs. Hartwell. And someone who needed a reason to drag Jakob Brennan back into the light. I don't understand. Your husband wasn't just a businessman, Eleanor. He was a government contractor. Army supplies, land deals, things that required federal approval. Things that made him very valuable to certain people. Jakob felt a chill run down his spine. What kind of things? The kind that can make a man very rich. Or very dead, if he starts asking too many questions. Charles was asking questions. Your husband got greedy. Started demanding a bigger cut of the profits. Started threatening to expose the whole operation if he didn't get what he wanted. Eleanor's face went pale. So someone killed him to keep him quiet. Someone killed him to protect a lot of very important people. People who couldn't afford to have their names connected to Charles Hartwell's business dealings. And they framed me for it. You were the perfect suspect. The abused wife with motive and opportunity. No one would look any deeper once they had you in custody. But I escaped. You escaped because someone let you escape. Someone who knew you'd run straight to the one person who might help you. Someone who knew Jakob Brennan's reputation for protecting innocent people. The truth hit Jakob like a physical blow. They wanted me involved. They needed you involved. You're the perfect fall guy, Brennan. The accused child molester who kidnapped a murderer. When they find your bodies, everyone will assume you killed each other in some kind of lover's quarrel. Our bodies? Eleanor's voice was barely a whisper. You don't think I came here alone, do you? You don't think I'd be stupid enough to track two dangerous fugitives without backup? As if summoned by his words, the sound of horses reached them from outside. Multiple riders, moving fast. Jakob rushed to the window and counted 6 men approaching the cabin. They weren't wearing badges, but they carried rifles and moved with military precision. Eleanor, he said quietly, we need to get out of here. Now. She looked at him. Then at Hawkins. Then back at him. What about him? Leave him. We don't have time. But if we leave him, he'll tell them everything. If we stay, we're dead. The sound of horses was getting closer. Jakob grabbed his rifle and checked the ammunition. 6 bullets. 6 men. Not good odds. There's a root cellar under the cabin, he said. Access panel behind the stove. We can hide there until they pass. They're not going to pass, Eleanor said grimly. They're going to burn us out. She was right. Through the window, Jakob could see the men spreading out around the cabin, surrounding it. These weren't lawmen come to make an arrest. These were killers come to clean up loose ends. The back window, he said. We can make it to the trees if we move fast. What about him? Eleanor nodded toward Hawkins. What about him? If they're here to kill us, what do you think they'll do to him? A federal marshal who knows too much? Jakob looked at Hawkins and saw the fear in the man's eyes. The marshal had realized the same thing Eleanor had. He wasn't here to witness their capture. He was here to be another victim. Please, Hawkins whispered. Don't leave me here. Why shouldn't we? You came here to arrest Eleanor. You called me a child molester. You were going to destroy both our lives. I was following orders. I was doing my job. Your job was to help murderers cover their tracks? I didn't know. I swear I didn't know what this was really about. Outside, one of the riders called out, "Brennan, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands up." Eleanor moved to the window and peered out carefully. "They're not wearing badges," she said. "They're not lawmen." "No," Jakob agreed. "They're not." He looked at Hawkins, tied to the chair, helpless. A man who'd come here to arrest them but who was now as much a victim as they were. "Cut him loose," Jakob said finally. "What?" "Cut him loose. If we're going to die, we might as well die fighting together." Eleanor stared at him for a moment, then nodded. She pulled out her knife and cut the ropes binding Hawkins to the chair. The marshal rubbed his wrists and looked at them both with something like gratitude. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank us yet," Eleanor replied. "We're still probably going to die. Maybe. But at least we'll die knowing the truth." Outside, the voice called again. "Last chance, Brennan. Come out now, or we're coming in." Jakob checked his rifle one more time. 6 bullets. 6 men. And 3 people who had nothing left to lose. "Ready?" he asked. Eleanor and Hawkins nodded. Jakob kicked open the front door and stepped onto the porch, his rifle raised. "Come and get us!" The first bullet splintered the door frame inches from Jakob's head as he dove back inside the cabin, his heart hammering against his ribs. Outside, the 6 men had taken cover behind trees and rocks, their rifles trained on every window and door. "How many shots do you have?" Eleanor asked, crouched beneath the window with a hunting knife in her hand. 6, Jakob replied, checking his ammunition pouch. "You? Just this knife and whatever we can find in here." She looked around the cabin desperately. "What about you, Marshal? You got any weapons?" Hawkins patted his empty holster. "They took my gun when I went down, but I've got this." He pulled a small derringer from his boot. 2 shots. 8 bullets against 6 men, Eleanor said grimly. "Better than I expected." Another shot rang out, and glass exploded inward as a window shattered. The 3 of them pressed themselves against the floor as more bullets punched through the cabin walls. "They're trying to flush us out," Hawkins said. "Standard tactic. Keep us pinned down while they move closer." "How long before they just burn us out?" Eleanor asked. "Not long, maybe 10 minutes before they get tired of waiting." Jakob's mind raced. The cabin was strong, but it wasn't a fortress. The walls were thick logs, but bullets could punch through them given enough time. And once the men outside got tired of the siege, they'd resort to fire. "There is something I need to tell you both," he said suddenly. Eleanor and Hawkins looked at him. "When I built this cabin, I prepared for the possibility that people might come looking for me. People who meant me harm." "What kind of preparation?" Eleanor asked. "The kind that might keep us alive." Jakob crawled across the floor to the fireplace and pressed his hand against a specific stone. A section of the wall swung inward, revealing a hidden compartment filled with weapons and supplies. "You've been holding out on us," Hawkins said, staring at the cache. "I've been surviving," Jakob corrected. He pulled out another rifle, a box of ammunition, and several sticks of dynamite. "I used to work mining claims before I became a carpenter. Learned a few things about explosives." Eleanor's eyes widened. "You're going to blow them up?" "I'm going to give them something to think about." More shots peppered the cabin. The attackers were getting bolder, moving closer to the walls. Through the broken window, Jakob could see muzzle flashes in the growing darkness. "Listen to me," he said, loading the second rifle. "I'm going to create a distraction. When I do, you 2 get out the back window and make for the trees. There's a trail that leads to an old mine shaft about half a mile north. Hide there until morning, then head for the territorial capital." "What about you?" Eleanor asked. "I'll be right behind you." "No, you won't." Her voice was steady, matter of fact. "You're planning to stay here and hold them off. You're planning to die." Jakob met her eyes. "One of us has to survive to tell the truth about what happened here, about who's really behind Charles's murder. Then let me be the one who stays." "Eleanor." "No." She grabbed his arm. "You've been running from false accusations for 3 years. You've been living in exile, alone, because people wouldn't believe the truth. I won't let you die for another lie." "She's right," Hawkins said quietly. "You both deserve better than this." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I'm the one who should stay. I'm the one who led them here. I'm the one who believed their lies about you both." The marshal's voice was heavy with regret. "Maybe it's time I did something right." Before anyone could stop him, Hawkins grabbed one of the dynamite sticks and the derringer. "Cover me," he said, and kicked open the back door. "Marshal, no!" Eleanor called out, but he was already gone. Through the window, they could see Hawkins running toward the trees, drawing fire from the hidden gunman. Bullets whined through the air around him, but he kept moving, the dynamite stick clutched in his hand. "He's going to get himself killed," Eleanor said. "That's the point," Jakob replied grimly. "He's giving us a chance." Hawkins made it to the edge of the clearing before a bullet caught him in the shoulder, spinning him around. But he stayed on his feet, and Jakob saw him light the fuse on the dynamite. "Get down!" Jakob shouted, pulling Eleanor to the floor. The explosion lit up the night sky like a miniature sun. Trees shattered, rocks flew through the air, and the screams of men echoed across the valley. When the smoke cleared, two of the attackers lay motionless near the blast crater. "Now," Jakob said, helping Eleanor to her feet. While they're confused, they ran for the back window, but as they reached it, more gunfire erupted from the front of the cabin. The remaining attackers had regrouped and were advancing on the building. "They're coming," Eleanor said, peering out the window. "4 of them? Maybe 5. Hawkins? I can't see him. He might be down." Jakob felt a surge of grief for the marshal who'd tried to redeem himself in the end. But there was no time to mourn. The attackers would be inside the cabin within minutes. "We need another way out," he said. "What about the root cellar you mentioned? It's not big enough for both of us. And there's no other exit." "Then we fight." Eleanor's voice was calm, determined. She'd picked up the second rifle and was checking the ammunition. "How many bullets do we have total?" "Maybe 20. Not enough for a long fight." "Then we make every shot count." The sound of breaking glass came from the front room. The attackers were coming through the windows now, trying to avoid the front door where they expected resistance. "Eleanor," Jakob said quietly, "I need you to know something." "What?" "These past few days, having you here, it's been the best time I've had in 3 years. You made me remember what it felt like to be human." She looked at him, and in her eyes he saw the same feeling reflected back. "You saved my life, Jakob. Not just from the storm, but from believing I was the monster they said I was." "You're not a monster. You're the strongest person I've ever met." "Strong enough to get us out of this? Strong enough for anything." The sound of footsteps on the front porch made them both turn toward the door. Someone was trying to get inside, moving carefully, testing each board. "3 of them at the front," Eleanor whispered, watching through the broken window. "One more circling around back. I'll take the front. You watch the back." "Jakob." "Yes?" "Whatever happens, I want you to know that I believe you. About Mary. About what really happened in Denver. I believe you." The words hit him like a physical blow. After 3 years of doubt, of wondering if maybe he really was the monster they'd painted him to be, her belief felt like salvation. "I believe you too," he said. "About Charles, about everything. You're innocent. We both are." "Yes, we both are." The front door exploded inward, and the shooting began. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it had begun, leaving only the acrid smell of gunpowder and the ringing in Jakob's ears as he crouched behind the overturned table, his rifle smoking in his hands. 2 bodies lay sprawled near the shattered front door, but the silence felt wrong too, complete, too sudden. "Eleanor," he called softly, not daring to raise his voice above a whisper. "Here," came her reply from the back room. "I got the one at the rear window. You? 2 down at the front. That leaves at least 2 more." But the cabin had gone eerily quiet. No footsteps, no whispered commands, no sounds of men positioning themselves for another assault. Just the wind through the broken windows and the distant crackling of small fires started by muzzle flashes. Jakob risked a glance over the table. The front yard was empty except for the bodies of the men he'd shot. No movement in the trees, no glint of rifle barrels in the moonlight. It was as if the remaining attackers had simply vanished. "They're retreating," Eleanor said, appearing in the doorway between the rooms. She held her rifle ready, her eyes scanning the darkness beyond the windows. "Or regrouping," Jakob replied. "This feels like a trap." "Maybe? But we can't stay here. This place is shot to pieces." She was right. The cabin walls were riddled with bullet holes, Windows were shattered, and the front door hung askew on its hinges. Whatever protection the building had offered was gone. "We need to move," Jakob said, gathering ammunition from his hidden cache. "Get to higher ground where we can see them coming." "What about Marshal Hawkins?" "We check on him first. If he's alive, we help him. If he's not," Jakob's voice trailed off. "If he's not, we make sure his sacrifice wasn't for nothing." They moved carefully through the cabin, checking each room for signs of the remaining attackers. The silence stretched on, broken only by the crunch of broken glass under their feet and the whisper of wind through the damaged walls. Outside, the blast crater where Hawkins had detonated the dynamite was still smoking. Pieces of shattered trees lay scattered across the clearing, and the bodies of 2 attackers were crumpled near the edge of the destruction. "There," Eleanor pointed to a figure lying motionless against a fallen log. "Is that him?" Jakob approached cautiously, rifle ready. But as he got closer, he could see it was indeed Hawkins alive, but barely. The marshal's shirt was soaked with blood from the bullet wound in his shoulder, and his face was pale with shock. "Marshal," Jakob said, kneeling beside him. "Can you hear me?" Hawkins' eyes opened slowly, focusing on Jakob's face. Did we get them?" "Some of them." "How bad are you hurt?" "Bullet went through. Hurts like hell, but I'll live." Hawkins struggled to sit up, wincing. "How many left?" "We think 2, maybe 3. They pulled back after the explosion." "They're not retreating," Hawkins said, his voice growing stronger. "They're waiting for reinforcements." Eleanor joined them, keeping watch on the tree line. "More men coming?" "Has to be. This operation is too important for them to fail. If we got away, if we reached the territorial capital with what we know, too many people would go to prison," Jacob finished. "Or worse. Some of these government contracts, the money involved. There are generals, politicians, judges, all getting rich off this corruption. They can't afford to let us live." The sound of horses reached them from the distance, multiple riders, moving fast through the forest. Jakob felt his heart sink. They'd fought off 6 men, but how many more were coming? "We need to move," he said, helping Hawkins to his feet. "Now." "Where?" Eleanor asked. "They'll track us wherever we go." "Not if we don't leave tracks." Jacob led them toward the stream that ran behind his cabin, its banks rocky and difficult to follow. The water was cold and fast-moving, fed by mountain springs that never warmed even in summer. "The stream leads to the old mining camp," he explained as they waded into the current. "From there, we can reach the main road without leaving a trail. And then we find someone who listened to the truth." They moved through the water in single file, Jakob leading, Eleanor in the middle, Hawkins bringing up the rear despite his wounded shoulder. The current was strong enough to wash away their scent, making it harder for tracking dogs to follow. Behind them, the sound of horses grew louder. Voices called out as the reinforcements reached the destroyed cabin. "They're good," Hawkins said, listening to the organized search beginning behind them. "Military training, probably. They'll figure out we took to the water soon enough." "How long do we have?" Eleanor asked. "Maybe 20 minutes before they start checking the stream. Less if they brought dogs." The water was numbing their legs, but they kept moving. Jakob's Kabini sanctuary for 3 years was now a smoking ruin behind them. Everything he'd built, everything he'd carved, all of it was gone. "I'm sorry," Eleanor said, as if reading his thoughts. "About your home." "It was never really a home," Jakob replied. "It was just a place to hide." "What's the difference?" "A home is where you're not afraid to be yourself, where you're not afraid to let people see who you really are." They reached a bend in the stream where the water deepened, forcing them to swim. Hawkins struggled with his wounded shoulder, but he managed to keep up. "Almost there," Jakob said, pointing to a rocky outcropping ahead. "The mining camp is just beyond those rocks." But as they approached the camp, Jakob noticed something wrong. There were fresh horse tracks in the mud near the abandoned buildings. Recent tracks. "They're here," he whispered, pulling Eleanor and Hawkins behind a large boulder. "They got ahead of us somehow." Through the darkness, they could see lanterns moving through the ruins of the old camp. At least 4 men, searching the buildings methodically. "They know this area," Hawkins said grimly. "They know all the places we might run to." "Then we don't run," Eleanor said quietly. "We fight." "With what?" "We're outnumbered, outgunned, and you're wounded," Jakob pointed out. "We're also angry," Eleanor replied. And we know the truth. That has to count for something. Jakob looked at her. This woman who'd stumbled into his life 3 days ago and changed everything. She was right. They'd been running from lies for too long. Maybe it was time to stop running and start fighting back. What do you have in mind? He asked. We split up. Draw them away from each other. Make them think we're a larger group than we are. That's suicide, maybe. But it's better than dying like cornered animals. Hawkins nodded slowly. She's right. We've got nothing left to lose. We've got everything to lose, Jakob said. Our lives, our chance to tell the truth, our what? Eleanor interrupted. Our future? Jakob, what future do we have if we keep running? What kind of life is that? He looked at her, really looked at her, and saw the determination in her eyes. The same determination that had driven her to knock on his door in the storm. The same strength that had kept her alive when everyone else wanted her dead. All right, he said finally, but we do this smart. We use the mine shafts, the old tunnels, force them to come at us one at a time. The tunnels might be unstable, Hawkins warned. Then we'd better move fast. They crept toward the mining camp, staying in the shadows cast by the abandoned buildings. The searchers were thorough, checking every structure, every hiding place, but they were also predictable, following a pattern that Jakob could read. There, he whispered, pointing to a shaft entrance hidden behind a collapsed wall. That tunnel connects to 3 others. We can move through the mountain without being seen. What if they follow us down? Then we bring the whole thing down on top of them. Eleanor's smile was fierce. Now you're talking. They slipped into the tunnel just as the searchers moved to the next building. The darkness was complete, but Jakob knew these shafts from his early days in the territory. He'd explored them when he first arrived, looking for a place to hide if necessary. The tunnel sloped downward, leading deeper into the mountain. Their footsteps echoed off the stone walls, but the sound was muffled by the tons of rock above them. This is it, Eleanor said, as they reached a junction where 3 tunnels met. This is where we make our stand. How? Hawkins asked. We let them come to us. Make them think we're trapped. Then we show them what happens when you corner innocent people and try to destroy their lives. Jakob understood. They were going to use the tunnels as a trap, luring the searchers into a confined space where superior numbers wouldn't matter. It could work, he said, but it's dangerous. If we miscalculate, we won't, Eleanor said firmly. We can't afford to. Above them, they could hear voices as the searchers discovered the tunnel entrance. Footsteps echoed down the shaft, growing closer. Here they come, Hawkins whispered, checking his derringer. You ready for this? Jakob looked at Eleanor one more time. In the darkness, he could barely see her face, but he could feel her strength, her determination. After 3 years of hiding, of running, of believing that he was the monster they'd painted him to be, she'd shown him who he really was. Ready, he said. The first man down the tunnel never saw the rope stretched across the shaft at ankle height, and his scream echoed off the stone walls as he plummeted into the old mine pit Jakob had remembered from his early explorations. The sound of his body hitting the bottom 40 feet below was followed by an eerie silence that seemed to swallow the mountains themselves. One down, Eleanor whispered from her position behind a support beam, her rifle trained on the tunnel entrance. How many more? At least 6, Hawkins replied, pressing his back against the rough stone wall. Blood had soaked through his shirt, but his hand was steady on his derringer. Maybe 8 if they called for more backup. Jakob crouched near the junction of 3 tunnels, listening to the voices echoing from above. The men were arguing now, their confidence shaken by the loss of their companion. But they were professionals, and professionals didn't retreat just because things got difficult. They're coming, he said, hearing the careful footsteps of men testing each step. Multiple entry points. 2 from the main shaft, probably 1 each from the side tunnels. Good, Eleanor said grimly. Let them spread out. Easier to pick them off. The irony wasn't lost on Jakob. 3 days ago, he'd been carving wooden toys in his peaceful cabin, living the quiet life of a man who'd given up on human connection. Now he was preparing to kill government agents in an abandoned mine shaft, fighting for the right to prove his innocence. Light flickered in the main tunnel as someone approached with a lantern. Jakob could see the shadow of a rifle barrel preceding the man, sweeping left and right as he advanced. Brennan! The voice echoed through the tunnels. "We know you're down there. Come out, and we'll make this quick." "Like you made it quick for Charles Hartwell?" Eleanor called back, her voice carrying clearly through the stone passages. "Your husband got what he deserved, lady. Just like you're going to get what you deserve." "What I deserve is the truth." Eleanor's voice rose with anger. "What I deserve is justice for what you animals did to him." Jakob heard movement in the side tunnels, now boots scraping against stone, the rustle of clothing against rock walls. They were being surrounded, just as he'd expected. But that was the plan. "Now!" he whispered, and struck a match. The flame caught the dynamite fuse he'd placed near the entrance to the left tunnel. The spark raced along the cord, disappearing into the darkness where he'd positioned the explosive near a key support beam. What was that? The man with the lantern had stopped advancing, sensing danger. "That was your funeral," Jakob replied, and dove behind a pile of old mining equipment. The explosion shook the entire mountain. Rock dust filled the air, and the left tunnel collapsed in a thunderous avalanche of stone and timber. Screams echoed from within the debris, then were cut off abruptly. "Two more down," Eleanor said, coughing in the dust-filled air. "Maybe three," but their victory was short-lived. The men in the main tunnel opened fire, their bullets ricocheting off the stone walls in deadly patterns. Jakob felt chips of rock sting his face as he pressed himself against the floor. "They're advancing," Hawkins shouted over the gunfire. "Two of them, moving fast." Jakob raised his rifle and fired at the first muzzle flash he saw. The bullet sparked off stone, but he heard a grunt of pain. Not a killing shot, but enough to slow the attacker down. Eleanor's rifle cracked from across the chamber, and one of the lanterns went out. The remaining attackers were firing blind now, their shots wild and desperate. "Jakob!" Eleanor's voice was urgent. "The right tunnel! Someone's coming through the right tunnel!" He spun around just as a figure emerged from the side passage, rifle raised. Jakob's shot took the man in the chest, dropping him instantly. But the distraction cost him. The remaining attackers in the main tunnel were closer now, their shots more accurate. "We need to move," he said, crawling toward Eleanor's position. "They're going to overrun us." "Where?" "The left tunnel's blocked, and they're coming from the other two." "The old shaft, the one that leads to the surface near the creek. I thought you said it was too dangerous." "It is, but it's better than dying here." They gathered their remaining ammunition and prepared to move. But as they reached the narrow passage that led to the old shaft, more voices echoed from above. "Reinforcements," Hawkins said weakly. The marshal was losing blood, his face pale in the reflected light of the remaining lantern. "How many?" Eleanor asked. "Sounds like a lot. Maybe a dozen men." Jakob felt his heart sink. They'd fought bravely, but they were outnumbered and running out of options. The old shaft was their only escape route, but it was also a dead end if they couldn't reach the surface. "We go up," he said finally. "All of us, together. If we're going to die, we die trying to reach the light." They started up the narrow shaft, Jakob leading the way. The wooden ladder was old and rotted, but it held their weight. Behind them, the voices of their pursuers grew louder as more men poured into the tunnel system. "They're following us," Eleanor said, looking back down the shaft. "I can see their lights." "Climb faster," Jakob urged. "We're almost there." But as they neared the top, Jakob realized their mistake. The shaft exit was covered by a heavy wooden grate, secured from the outside. They were trapped. "It's locked," he said, pushing against the barrier. "The grate won't budge." "Stand back," Eleanor said, raising her rifle. "I'll shoot the lock." "Wait," Hawkins said from below. "Listen." They all fell silent, and Jakob heard what the marshal had noticed. The voices below had stopped. The pursuit had ended. "They're not following us anymore," Eleanor said. "Why?" "Because they don't need to," Jakob realized with growing horror. "They're going to seal us in." The sound of heavy timbers being moved echoed up the shaft. The attackers were blocking the tunnel entrance, trapping them in the old mine shaft with no way out. "How much air do we have?" Eleanor asked. "Not much. Maybe a few hours." They sat in the darkness, listening to the sounds of their tomb being sealed. But as the last timber was put in place, Jakob heard something else, a voice, clear and authoritative, giving orders. "Make sure it's secure. We can't afford any mistakes." The voice was familiar, but Jakob couldn't place it. Then Eleanor gasped. "I know that voice," she said. That's Judge Morrison. He was Charles's business partner. Morrison? Hawkins' voice was filled with recognition. Judge Morrison signed the warrant for your arrest. He was working with Charles. And when Charles got greedy, when he started demanding a bigger share of the profits, Morrison had him killed. Jakob finished. And framed you for it? But why involve me? Why drag me into this? Because you're the perfect fall guy, Eleanor said. The hermit child molester who kidnapped a murderer. When they find our bodies, the story writes itself. Above them, the voices were fading as the men withdrew. Soon, they would be alone in the darkness, with only a few hours of air and no way out. I'm sorry, Jakob said. I'm sorry I got you both into this. You didn't get us into anything, Eleanor replied. We got ourselves into this by refusing to accept the lies they told about us. Maybe that's not such a bad thing, Hawkins said weakly. Maybe it's better to die fighting for the truth than to live with their lies. Jakob looked up at the grate above them, then at Eleanor's face in the dim light. After 3 years of hiding, of believing that he was the monster they'd painted him to be, she'd shown him who he really was. And now, in what might be their final moments, he understood something important. I'm not sorry, he said suddenly. I'm not sorry we fought back. I'm not sorry we refused to be victims. And I'm not sorry I met you, Eleanor. She smiled, and in that smile, Jakob saw all the courage and strength that had brought her to his door that stormy night. I'm not sorry either, she said. Whatever happens now, we told the truth. We fought for it. That has to count for something. It counts for everything, Jakob replied. And in the darkness of the mine shaft, surrounded by enemies and running out of time, they discovered something that their accusers would never understand. The truth was worth dying for, but it was also worth living for. Above them, the wooden grate creaked in the wind, and Jakob thought he heard something else, the sound of horses riding hard through the night. Someone's coming, he whispered. More of them? I don't know, but whoever it is, they're in a hurry. They listened as the horses stopped near the shaft entrance, followed by voices, different voices, official voices. This is Deputy Marshal Collins. By order of the territorial government, you are all under arrest. Eleanor grabbed Jakob's hand. The cavalry? Sounds like it. Above them, the grate was being unlocked. Fresh air poured into the shaft, and Jakob had never been so grateful to breathe in his entire life. Hello down there, a voice called. Are you all right? We're alive, Eleanor shouted back. We're alive! As they climbed toward the light, toward freedom, toward the chance to tell their story, Jakob realized that sometimes the truth was worth more than just dying for. Sometimes, if you were very lucky, it was worth living for too.